Thank you, Samaya, and thanks you all for tuning in and for listening. And thank you, Bushwick Film Festival, for, I think this is number 14. This is an amazing festival. It's actually one of my favorites in the city. Very happy to be part of it, and I'm very happy to be sharing, I guess you'd say, sharing a screen with Sarah Gamble, Minette Louie, and Ali Moss, because what you have here are three incredibly productive, incredibly popular, well-known, and really, really good at their jobs producers from different genres. So Ali is, the go-to nonfiction person. She's done amazing docs. This year alone has brought some incredible stories to us. Minette Louie, who is an independent producer who's crossed over from big studio to little budgets to big budgets, and Sarah Gamble, who's now a showrunner on one of the most successful shows on Netflix called You. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation because we've got three amazing perspectives here. It's the producers panel. The definition producer is always changing. As the industry changes, that definition changes, and I hope we're going to get into a little bit of that. But I want to start with these guys right now, because what I want you to one by one tell us is for why you say yes. That's my first question, is why do you say yes? What motivates you? What drives you towards a particular project? Ali, you had a great year. Why don't we start with you?
Sure. I really look for projects that align with my values, and projects that will allow me to bring stories into the world that will help make the world the kind of place I want to live in and that I want my children to inherit. And so that's always a guiding principle for me when I take on something. And I also really evaluate the director or directors. And I've learned from experience that that's the most important thing for me, is collaborating with directors who are not just open but really excited to have my creative input, as well as the logistical and or funding side of things that is also, to varying extents depending on the project, part of my purview. But I very much consider myself a creative producer, and so I look for projects where I will get to have that role too.
That's smart. We're going to get more into that creative producer line in a second. But Minette, what about you? Why do you say yes?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is the quality of the storytelling, obviously, the scripts and the director, the talent of the director, but also it has to answer the question, why now? Like, why the urgency to tell this story now? What is subject matter? Is it talking about, like, what's its relevancy to current events? Because that sort of lends itself to the marketability of the film, which is it's more important than ever nowadays, with social media being a primary driver of publicity and virality, to trying to figure out like the memeability of a film. It's because people's attention spans are tiny now. And I released 3 films over the pandemic, and I realized that, like, you used to have like a 3-month lead up time for promotion, and now it's super short. It's like 2 weeks, because everybody's attention span is so short now, and films sort of come and go. There's just like a glut of content, and so having something that's urgent and marketable and people want to talk about now is really important. And as far as independent films go, castability is really important as well, because there's always this chicken and egg question of, like, what comes first, cast or financing? In the majority of independent films, like you kind of have to have cast first before you can find the financing, especially if it's like a first-time director or a, not obviously a commercial film. If it's an awards-driven film, cast is extremely important.
That makes sense. Sarah, before we return back to what Minette said, what about you? Why do you say yes? You are coming from a different perspective because you also create your own projects.
Yeah. The first thing is a literal feeling in my gut when I'm either have an idea that I can't let go of, or very frequently IP is sent to me. And that feeling is just that there's something to the story beyond the plot moves there's something kind of emotional or part of the cultural conversation that I'm really interested in. And then very quickly, my instinct as just somebody who's been in a writer's room for years and years and years, trying to turn a great pilot into many episodes. That's what kicks in. You know, the most amazing thing that can happen is you have a show that runs for many episodes, many seasons, but that's also like the worst thing that can happen to you because you have to keep coming up with ideas. So I only say yes, and this is if I'm writing it or I'm helping somebody else to write it, only if I really can kind of see how the story generates more story, that the world is a place that we would want to expand and spend a lot of time in. Because again, the best and worst case scenario is like, what if you get to do this 150 times? Like, are you going to run out?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Are you going to run out? Does that ever? That's really the way you guys all tied it together is very, very smart. And I want to go back to the beginning. So Minette said with independent film, cast should come first. So Allie, in the nonfiction space, what should come first?
The story and a way into it that makes it more than just news. There, you know, when I was an executive at Discovery, people would come all the time, filmmakers, and say, oh, there's earthquakes in Oklahoma because of natural gas drilling, and I want to make a film about that. And, you know, our response was always, well, go find the characters, find the story, and then we'll see if there's a film there. But that comes first. It's you know, I guess no different than what Minette experiences with the casting and Sarah with the script. Like it's the same in the nonfiction space. You still have to know that there is a film there. And then it's also about, you know, what production company is making it? Do they have the resources to get it done? You know, who's directing it? And how much autonomy will I have to cast our team so that it's the kind of team I want to work with, a diverse team, you know, a team where people are really fantastic at what they do. And my job just becomes to let them do their thing. That's certainly what I look for. And, you know, the certainly an early sign of success, of future potential success for a documentary is getting that kind of team in place.
Do you find yourself working with the same team, or does the team change the story?
You know, I'm an independent producer as well, and so I've worked with many different teams. There are some people I would kill to work with again. There are people I've worked with many times over, and that familiarity is really nice and lets you just get started off with a shorthand that, you know, it doesn't require the relationship and trust building that working with a new team does. You know, I have my favorite DPs, I have my favorite editors, but I don't have control over that a lot of the time. And so if it's a great story, you know, I really have to look at, is it worth doing, even if I won't be able to work with the people that I love. And there's so many great people out there that, like, most of the time it's just finding more people who I would love to work with again. But that also involves, you know, doing due diligence about new people and new companies and asking around for what other people's experiences have been with them, so you don't get stuck in a situation that is hard to extricate yourself from.
That's true.
I'll just add, because it's something that Ali said sparked something in me. And, you know, and another consideration that's really important, I think, when deciding whether to take on a project or not is what distributor you envision buying the project, especially when it comes to independent film. Because, you know, you can be as in love with the bold vision and as passionate about the subject matter as you know, you can be totally passionate about those things. It's just incredibly difficult marketplace right now for distribution and financing. And so, you know, I think it's important to be sort of practical and realistic about, okay, which distributors are actually going to buy this movie and distribute it. And you know, I still take on films that are dark and, you know, hard to finance and stuff because I love them and I will fight for them. But you know, it's you know, sometimes I have a lot of films that have never gotten made because it's just too hard for the marketplace. So you have to have a balance. You know, you have to have the tough one, and you have to have the one that you can foresee like a path for.
Do you produce without distribution in place?
It depends. You know, I've done negative pickups. I've produced directly for studio finance films. And the majority of my films have been independently financed. But I have to tell you, it's getting really hard to find private equity now for film. And I think that's largely because, you know, because of the streamers, because of the dominance of streamers and how they, you know, they were coming to festivals and outbidding everyone for the films. And so the smaller distributors decided to, and they started making their own originals as well. And the smaller distributors like started doing the same thing. You know, I was on a panel the other day with Matthew Greenfield of Searchlight Pictures, and he was saying, like, you know, in the before times, back in the old, well, back a couple of years ago, Searchlight's slate was basically, you know, about like 75% of acquisitions of finished films. Now it's only 20%. And 80%, like, you know, they actually make the films in-house, they take them at script stage. And I think that is happening across the board with all distributors. It's like they are coming on board early at the script stage. And so you know, for private equity, there's less of a chance of getting bought at a festival and making their money back.
That's certainly true for the documentary space too. I mean, and then, you know, some streamers leave very little room for private equity to make anything off of it. So there's definitely been a shift over the last couple of years towards really only making projects that have a home from the beginning.
Yeah, in fact, I did a tweet rant this morning about the disappearance of backend thanks to the streamers.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. I must go find it. Okay.
My Twitter is just my first name, Annette, if anybody wants to read it.
I will find that. So here's a question though. So do you think, because there is a backlash from the independent producers, there is an anger or frustration, I think is a better word. Do you see that changing? So just to be clear, what we're talking about is there's a proliferation, the right word, of streamers making deals that are not filmmaker friendly, they're buyouts. And is that going to change, do you think?
I hope so. I mean, I hope that, you know, I mean, there are, you know, as producers, a bunch of us formed a union, or we're trying to form a union over the pandemic, because we're being treated way more as labor than as management because of these sort of buyout deals. The PGA is making moves to sort of try to restore some of the back end that's been lost, and you know, but it's a battle, and the pandemic has completely exacerbated all this because, you know, nothing was being released in theaters, so all the box office bonuses like somehow had to be converted into streaming bonuses. You know, the most famous case was Scarlett Johansson against right, but that's happening across the board with like Dune being released on HBO Max, and like, you know, all these deals having to be renegotiated that were previously based on theatrical and downstream revenue, which is disappearing. Sure. So I think that is a work in progress right now.
So two things. I'm going to remind everybody that's here, if you have questions, just start throwing them in the box, we'll address them. Do you think a union is the answer, or is popular, I think it's popular movement if everybody bands together and says, okay, we're not doing this, which has happened a few times already. Producers have gotten together, you know, and addressed SAG issues and addressed, God, there was another huge one, I'm blanking on it, but as a group, we've gotten together and said, okay, this is unacceptable.
Yeah, I mean, there have been loose formations of producers group. The PGA is sort of, it's not a union, but right. The definition of union is, you know, the power of collective bargaining. And that's something that producers didn't have before. And so it's like something that we're trying to establish because we are getting trampled upon by the studios and the streamers. And, you know, we're the only group that has no residuals, for example, you know, every other group gets residuals besides us. We don't have minimums, like, you know, we work our asses off over years developing projects. And so that's why the union formed, and we can hopefully band together and demand things like back end or some remuneration for the loss of back end.
Right. There's actually the producers that get back end, and there are, quite a few out there. That's all in the upfront negotiations. It doesn't really, it's not standard. And that's part of the problem. It's like almost like the rates are not standard.
That's right.
And so who gets residuals? The actors do, the directors do, or the director's team does.
Crew, everybody.
The crew doesn't
DP,
get residuals.
SAG, WGA, IATSE.
IATSE does not get residuals. Wait.
No,
IATSE.
crew does get, they get some residuals. They do.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Everybody gets residuals except for us.
Okay, I think I do hope that I'm gonna look that up. I do hope that
you know how IATSE is about to strike. Part of it is because the streamers are trying to get out of paying their residuals because they, so all the unions get residuals for us.
Okay, I don't think I knew that. But I also think that there's power in the strength in numbers, right? So if everybody starts, which is what we've all been doing individually, I know New York is a very close, it's not closed, it's a very, we know each other, right? So we all kind of have our own little networks and we can all say, hey, this happened, this didn't happen. And it makes a difference. I think in the world of television, and Sarah, you could probably speak to this, you started, your latest show started at Lifetime and then zipped over to Netflix. So you kind of saw both worlds there for a second. You had Lifetime, which is, Lifetime, which is great and has really good content, and certainly not the numbers that Netflix has. So tell us how did that come about? And how do you find it different, especially jumping on what Minette and I were talking about?
I mean, Netflix and the streamers that came after have been second windows for a lot of networks and basic cable, terrestrial cable outlets for a really long time. And especially when Netflix first started putting things on their platform, they would kind of save some of those shows that had a smaller viewership. People would find the previous season and binge it. So that had been in place for there was a lot of that for about 8 years, I think, maybe even a little bit longer. And Netflix was always a partner on You. So this is just this particular case. I mean, it is different in every case, but internationally, You was always going to be released as a Netflix original. The reason that it dropped as a Netflix original in the United States is because Lifetime canceled it before the window. And so, we had our first season, the critics liked it. The numbers didn't make sense for Lifetime's business model in terms of viewership or maybe the creative direction that the network was going. And in that little window, a lot of people kind of scrambled to put something in place to, make a deal that made sense for everybody, for Netflix to just assume full partnership. And, a lot of sort of kismet things happened, such as there was a push to make sure it dropped all over the world on the same day, which tends to help.
Yeah.
And then there's just a little bit of I don't think anybody expected for the numbers to be quite what they were. There's a bit of dropped right after Christmas. People really liked it. Maybe people didn't anticipate, partly because Lifetime's tagline is that it's television for women. So probably the expectation was lower in terms of finding a greater audience. And a lot of men watch the show now, that it's not, branded as television for women. So that's what happened. And since then, the business has been, the change in the business has been accelerating. I have never seen so much turnover at the highest levels and so many things changing within the life of a show as I have in the last 2 years.
As how involved are you? So as the showrunner, which coincidentally enough, the Writers Guild of America East now has, they're jumping on the West Coast and they have a showrunner class, I guess. It's a whole 12-week program, writers, and just the skills of a showrunner, what you need to be a showrunner, what it means to be a showrunner. And everybody's definition is completely different as to what a showrunner is, which is very, very funny. But I'm not asking what a showrunner is because that's a whole different panel. But as the showrunner of this popular show, how involved are you in these types of decisions and in the marketing, in the physical production, in what the networks are saying? Are you involved in that?
Yeah, there's a level of sort of financial maneuvering that's above my pay grade in terms of how the deal is made between the studio, Warner Brothers, and the streamer, Netflix. There's some stuff that I'm not actively involved in. There's a great marketing team at Netflix. They just send all their stuff to me and we chat about it. And if I have a suggestion or a note, I give it to them. But in terms of just the making of the actual show, the showrunner, and I actually think it is pretty standard. It's usually someone who started as a writer or is a writer, not always, but usually. And we run the writer's room. We take all of the notes on the scripts. We tend to do passes on every script. And then on the production side, I'm very in the weeds on pretty much every aspect of production. I mean, I couldn't possibly do everything. And we have amazing line producers and we have people who do all of that stuff. Producing director is a really important job on the production side. But I'm sort of the person through which all the information passes. And ultimately there's going to be a conversation with me in it.
Can I just say, as a person from on the film side who's doing my first series and learning all of the TV stuff, it's quite different structurally. I would agree. Yeah, it seems to me that showrunner is a pretty defined role. What has always puzzled me about it, being a film producer, is that the trajectory comes from the writing side. And that's puzzling to me because there's so much like human resources, casting, crew management, and stuff like that you have to do as a showrunner. Like there's it's a producerial position, and so it was just weird that people who are writer inclined, artistically inclined get that job. But
it's not for everybody.
No, but I'll also tell you, interesting. When we just had great showrunners chat, and so this is pretty impressive or amazing, I think is a better word. So there's a couple of camps, as there always are camps, and we had some showrunners that really just did not have a good relationship with their physical producers. And that was a very, very interesting conversation. And then there were other showrunners that feel like they are there to be the creative voice of the show and leave the management to the physical producers.
Right.
And it was really very, very interesting to see which show was more successful, which show was going into its 5th or 6th season, which show didn't go after. I mean, it was all very fascinating. And I feel like in my experience, I have a lot of TV experience. Every showrunner approaches the job differently. And that I found fascinating.
Well, in the film world, what you said at the beginning in the panel where you're like, this is a panel about producers, about producing, and you said the definition keeps changing. On the film side, it hasn't changed at all. And in fact, I'm going to post something in the chat. This is the definition of a producer according to the Academy, which is in their museum, and it's very specific. And I think the reason why everybody thinks the role of producer is changing now is because that credit is being stolen and bastardized by financiers, managers, executives, and it's not, so people don't understand that like the buck stops with the producer. This would happen on the set last week on Rust with Alec Baldwin being a producer and this DP Helena Hutchins being killed. It's like, where's the buck stop with? If you look at the list of producers on that film, executive, manager, financier, actor, who is the producer? Who's responsible? And it's like, are they now regretting taking that credit? Because with that credit comes great responsibility, and so the role of producer has not changed. It's the people taking that title and thinking that there's something they're not.
Right. You kind of know. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say on the TV side, like a good indicator that you're actively producing and show running your show is that you're the one who gets called into the meeting if the show is over budget. You're the one who's sitting down with the president of the studio and the person who runs physical production for the studio and talking about like, here's what our plan is. And you'll be sitting next to your line producer to have that conversation. But just because, Minette, you said that it didn't feel intuitive to you, like in terms of a skill set for producers, it is a very strange system in television that people who don't come from business, who don't necessarily come from set, learn producing. It's almost an apprenticeship, really. You get more and more producerial, like just responsibility as you climb the ladder, or you get there really fast, but you're paired with somebody who's there essentially to cover your butt, to teach you, who has a ton more experience. But it's a really simple reason it's the writer in TV. It's because the story's going to go on for a long time. And creatively, it only really makes sense if somebody who is holding a lot of power to make decisions is deeply in the matrix of what the show is, what it needs to be, and also what the buyer has bought. So that's how it started. It's imperfect, but that's how it started.
You know, Variety actually coined the term show. I'm sorry, Burnett, go ahead.
I was going to say, on the film side, a creative producer is also very deeply involved in all of that, you know, and so it's not, you know, a creative producer in film is different than a physical producer in TV. You know, we are completely invested hand in hand with our writer directors in soup to nuts. So that's, I mean, in fact, like it's interesting because like I've actually been tapped as a film producer to like come on and help produce series and TV shows and help develop stuff, because there's just so much content being developed that the execs can't really oversee it. So they need people who have that experience in script development and stuff to like help the writers and stuff. So it's interesting. It's conflating. Film and TV is conflating, and I feel like lines are blurring quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, on the demo, go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's not a bad thing. So, for example, episodic TV today is more expensive than some independent films that we've both been involved in. And part of that is because it can be, and that's not just a streamer thing. Some of the broadcast shows are spending a good penny as well. And so what I started to say before is that Variety coined the term showrunner. And the reason they did that, this was back in the 90s, because so many people on television have been getting producer credits for right and wrong reasons, which we'll get into in one second, that they needed to know who to talk to about the creative. And that's why they coined the term showrunner. If you look at some agencies and some definitions of showrunners, also talks about management and financing, and the showrunner does the budget, which is not necessarily the case. In years gone by, writers, because you know every writer's room has between 4 and 8 writers, if you're lucky, you couldn't give them raises every year because, you know, for obvious reasons, if your show is as successful as your TV show is, that's how much money or budget gets cut. There's no rhyme or reason to that. But if you're lucky enough to get a second season or third season, your numbers don't really change, but everyone's rates go up by 3%, which is standard. So what people started to do, what the producers started to do, was give the writers producer credits and a producer fee, and then they don't have to cover the WGA fringe on that. So that's how this proliferation of television producer credits started, because almost every writer in the room gets a producer credit. One writer, maybe the staff writer or the network must hire, gets a staff writer credit, but almost every other writer gets a producer credit. And that's why when you have a TV show in the opening, you really do have about 5, 6, sometimes 8 credits. But if you know the industry, then you know that co-executive producer is either the showrunner or the supervising writer in the room or the supervising producer. You know, there are reasons why there are all these titles, and some of them make sense and some of them are just arbitrary. But I think the producers made that mistake by creating all those titles just as a way to, you know, what do producers do? They try to appease everybody and protect the costs of the show. So that was, I don't know if that helps at all or adds to this conversation, but that's kind of, we only have a minute left. I'm sorry, we have to get to Fabio's question. Sorry, Allie, go, last word on this and then we'll get to questions.
Well, I was just going to say that so much of what Sarah and Manat have been discussing is true on the documentary side, and sometimes even more so. The dilution of producing credits from, you know, producer down, you know, co-executive producer means a funder. There's typically not a role on a documentary that anyone would be credited as co-executive producer, but also that, you know, I really appreciated the meme that Manat shared of, you know, the definition of a producer, because it implies a creative role. And I think there's a misunderstanding that like the art, the vision always comes from the director. But there's so many projects where I've found the story, I've developed it for, you know, a year or more, and then I find the right director for it. And then it's a creative partnership from there. But the industry still, I think, views directors as the ultimate creative talent, and, you know, producers, you know, directors get all the accolades when things go well, and producers get all the blame when things don't.
And that really, in nonfiction, has never been more, is prevalent the right word? Because, and this is, I don't know, you must be very involved with the Documentary Producers Alliance in light of what you're saying here. So the DPA, which belongs in narrative as well, because they're really getting out there and saying, the directors don't act alone. A film buy is, it doesn't make sense because there would be no film without the writers. There'd be no film without the producer. And in nonfiction, more than any other genre, the producers really drive the machine. So it's a very interesting problem that we have. You know, like it's the proliferation of the dilution of producer credits. It's actually fascinating. And I think every show sets the tone. So we got to get to questions and then we'll go back because Minette, you brought up Rust, and I'd love to get everybody's you know, tragedy of what happened aside, the loss of life, which is tragic. There's protocols and consequences, and we're saying we're the producers. And I would love to, maybe let's finish that, and then I promise Fabio will get to your questions. So since Minette, you brought it up, do you want to address that? And I don't think we can talk about Rust specifically because we weren't there. And every article I read has new, whether it's new information or new rumors. But from a producer's perspective and managing and running a set, where's your thinking?
As I said before, the buck stops with the producer, you know, and it's a role that carries the most responsibility, and you're beholden to your financiers, and you have to take care of your crew and your cast. You're liable. You're literally like, you know, I'm the owner of the LLCs that are producing my movies, you know, on independent films. And, you know, if anything goes wrong, like I'm liable. And so I take that credit very seriously. I take that role very seriously. And, you know, I think that people come in and think, oh yeah, producing a movie or whatever. It's like, no. And when it comes to safety, whether you're making a union film or non-union film, I've made a lot of non-union films in my career. It's like safety is paramount, you know, and you know, I hire a union armorer on my non-union films, you know, I spend extra money on that thing and you know, cut corners elsewhere where it's safe to do that, you know. So you just have to think of these things. You are a leader as a producer, and you should be held responsible if something goes wrong on your set.
Allie,
yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I was throwing it to you because in the world of nonfiction, you have a lot more opportunities for fly by night and quick run out and grab it. So how does that, as a producer, how do you control that?
I mean, you know, what comes to mind for me as a sort of analogous situation has been producing during COVID, and the kinds of protocols that various productions either imposed or didn't. And, you know, I was producing this film about Tony Fauci throughout the pandemic. And so we obviously took it very seriously and consulted with our subjects on what our protocols could be, in addition to being really grateful actually to the DGA for being so strict, because it gave us cover if crew was complaining about, you know, our testing protocols or our masking protocols, to say, well, you know, this is a DGA production and these are their rules, and, you know, I can do nothing about it. But, you know, from talking to crew that I love, who've worked on many other projects over the course of this pandemic, not every distributor takes it the same way. You know, not every producer approaches it the same way. And, you know, I've spoken to people who've been really uncomfortable with COVID protocols on their sets. And, you know, I would never take that risk, because no story, no scene is as important as my crew's health and safety.
Sure. Sarah, you're starting to shoot. What are your COVID protocols like?
We just shot a whole season during COVID. Our writer's room for season 3 of You opened in February of 2020. So we had just done 6 weeks of story breaking and we're preparing to shoot in the summer. And then pandemic hit, we all went home and we were really a part of a conversation across television, across all the studios. Like showrunners were jumping on Zooms to just share information a lot in the beginning. And there wasn't a question for us that we were going to put every protocol in place. In fact, and I really credit our line producer this past season and producing director and just everybody kind of at the top of those decision chains for all kind of deciding we were going to do some things that were going to be harder. We shot shorter hours very frequently. We were concerned about mask fatigue and tested daily. I mean, our testing cadence was actually considered slight overkill at times by other productions, but you know, people kiss on our show. They punch each other at close range. I will just say about the thing that's in the news right now, and of course, I don't know what happened on that set, but I and every other TV producer I know have barely slept since that happened. We've been texting about it constantly. We have all been very emotional about it. I mean, no one intended for something that tragic to happen. There are reasons that it happened and those will become clear, but it is a really stark reminder of the fact that part of our job as producers is to endure being squeezed really within an inch of our sanity at times. I'm sure the 22nd day of that film, they were going to lose the star, you know, like there were reasons. They weren't hurrying to be mean people probably, you know, and there are a lot of pressures, and it is a really senseless and tragic reminder of why pushing back against whatever entity is asking something of you that could potentially be risky is just, it is part of your job to be a bad guy. It is part of your job to, as a producer who is a writer, it is sometimes part of my job to like hear the hard thing about my story and have to go back and reconsider it and come at it from a different angle because, you know, hopefully if the relationship is good between myself and the line producer and the AD who is making the schedule, then they don't tell me it's too hard unless it really is. They don't tell me it can't be done in the, you know, they like the challenge, they take pride in ambition, but if it's the step too far, like we need to be able to talk. So again, I'm not speaking at all about what happened on that film set. I'm just saying like, it is beyond sobering. Like, I don't think anyone working as a producer will ever be the same after what has happened this week, just in terms of the monumental reminder of what our responsibilities are and what can happen if we're not careful.
That's true. Yes, thank you for that. Yes. And the timing with the potential strike and the renegotiations, I mean, it just was all, there's a couple of reminders here. You're absolutely right. And it always does fall in the producer's lap, and it stops with the producers because we're the ones that set the tone. We're the ones that actually do the hiring. And then there's a whole level, and you know, I'm going to say the tragedy really is that what you just said, we've said before. We said it 3 years ago. We said it 10 years ago. We said it 14 years ago. Now we're really going to start paying attention. I just hope that that people find peace with this tragedy that we're there, because this is something that is, you know, hard to recover from. Okay, so thank you all for your thoughts and your wisdom on that, on this very difficult topic to talk about. So I'm going to quickly turn this over to some of our questions, because we do have a whole bunch of people here that wanted to get to hear from you guys and meet you guys. And I hope we felt like just a little, you know, we dropped a few kernels here for everybody to just really get into, and the insight of the industry. We barely scratched the surface of what these roles of these fabulous producers do. But we're here for another few minutes. If you guys can stay till for a few more minutes, another 10 minutes, that would be great. Poor Fabio's had a question up now for about 40 minutes, so I'm kidding. So here we go. Fabio wants to talk about short films and how accessible they can be to the general public, and what do you say is the most efficient path to getting a short distributed or seen by one of our streaming platforms. Any thoughts on that? That's a tough one. I know there's a couple of really good short film festivals, and I feel like you guys should jump in here, but festivals are sort of the entry door to being seen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know of a path to distribution for short docs other than through festivals or public television, which does have some funding for short docs, but it's not a space I've worked in, so that I can't go deeper than that. But that's sort of my superficial take on it, for sure.
Festivals. I mean, what are shorts anyway? But they're calling cards, right, for the producer or the director to say, here's what I'm capable of doing, or here's the potential of a story. Festivals are a smart way to get them out there. And also there's a network that just does shorts, and I should be more prepared and I'm not, but Fabio, if you want to throw me your email, I'll get that to you, because there's a network that it's relatively new, and their goal is to just do short films.
There have been networks. Atom Films was one a while ago. They have Vimeo Short of the Week. There was a sales agent. I haven't done shorts in a long time, so I'm speaking from memory here, but like there was a sales agent that sold shorts to international territories, because Europe and Australia would actually buy shorts more. I don't know if the landscape has changed. I mean, certainly the US streamers are not buying shorts right now. Neon, I think, announced a year or two ago that they were going to start buying shorts and putting them in front of their features, but they only release a dozen features a year, so I don't know if that's actually happening. But it's not something, I mean, a short film it's hard to sell, I believe. It's like Dana said, it's mainly for calling cards.
Yeah, and on top of that, it's, some platforms see them as awards plays. Yeah. And so, a long time ago when I worked at HBO under the amazing Sheila Nevins, like she understood what she could do with short documentaries and, talk about queens. She was and now at MTV remains the queen of that. Like she sees the potential there. And it's not necessarily a viewership game. It's an awards play. So, that's if you can find somebody who recognizes the value of that, and you have something really special, that's really the best way to get a doc short out there.
Yeah. And by the way, they're great calling cards if they're not too expensive to produce, because you rarely get your money back on a short, but they are a good calling card. Minette, what do you feel about proof of concepts? Speaking of shorts, does everybody know what a proof of concept is?
I've only ever done one, and it was for this film Land Ho, and we specifically shot the first 10 minutes of the actual film and used that as a proof of concept to raise money, and we put those 10 minutes of the film in the movie because we're like, we're not gonna go hire a crew and stuff and like make this thing and not actually use it. So I do feel like they're a waste of money. I think you do better with a lookbook and a tone reel.
Totally agree. It's interesting because people do something like a look, proof of concept or short, and then post it, and it's not ready to be posted. So, and then that just destroys the project. You should not post something unless you're absolutely ready for it to be seen.
No,
you do the proof of concept.
If you're raising money and developing something, don't post anything. Like you'll blow your marketing exclusive once the film is done and whatnot. So just keep it all internal.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's very, very surprising because so many people just coming up are so much of the digital generation, and they only want to shoot something and put it up there so they can get their 8,000 likes. But if it's not good, it's going to do more harm than good.
Half my job as a producer on set these days is going around and telling all the millennials to stop posting pictures on Instagram of set, because it's just like, stop,
before I start marketing, there's a whole, before I start any show, there's a whole NDA that everyone has to sign that involves social media, and they are not allowed to do anything. And if it gets traced back to them, they know they're going to get fired. It's a really big deal. Two things. So Fabio, there's a lot of responses in the chat about some short opportunities. And then can we just talk to Kate Hopkins for 1 second? I'm just going to read her quote or her question. Honestly, how do you deal with the nightmare that is men in this industry? So Kate. All right, who would like to go first?
I'm happy to talk about that. I get asked that question a lot for some reason. Yeah. I say this with so much empathy, just based on the tone of your question, therapy, because you're frustrated and it's affecting your drive and your ambition and your creativity, and your primary responsibility beyond any other is that if you have gifts and abilities, you need to protect them and use them in your lifetime, right? You are a creative person and perhaps an artist first, right? This business is deeply imperfect. And when people ask me about this nightmare, that nightmare, sexism, racism, ageism, ableism, all of them are true. All of them exist, but not 100% across the board. And you can and will find your people and then want to continue to work with them. My mentors in television are by and large male. And also, the thing that I keep in mind when I am at my most frustrated is that you can't separate my gender from the complete package of who and what I am, the stories that I want to tell, the reasons that I get up in the morning, the way I hear and connect with other people. And I wouldn't trade that actually for being the dominant paradigm and at the very apex of patriarchy. That's not as interesting to me. And so when I think about it that way, I realize I've chosen this. I've chosen this even knowing that there will be challenges and there will be times that I really am going to need to talk about with my therapist. But, for me, it's worth it. And for me, I feel like, being the gender that you are is part of your superpower. And I mean that in a very grounded, not woo-woo kind of way. So, protect it and celebrate it also.
Right. I totally agree. There's always an ism. There's always going to be an ism. Ageism, sexism, there's always that. How we handle it is different. And I think that's why today is a little more telling than it's ever been. I hope you consider yourself, Sarah, a role model. Minette and Allie, you guys are all the best. And I do hope you're considering yourself role models because you are what people are looking to now. And I'm so happy that you're on this panel. I don't know if it's a coincidence that we're all women, but I'm thrilled. But I really think it's important to understand that the way we handle these transgressions, whether it's someone just telling you to smile or someone saying something really egregious, how we handle it is different these days.
Yeah, I mean, I'll
go ahead. No, go ahead. I'll go
okay.
after you.
I mean, I was just going to say, another really important part of my calculus at this point in my career, when I do have some say over who I get to work with and, confidence to say no to projects, is I'm much more inclined to take on a project if I get to work with a team of women, non-binary folks, queer people. I have no, or men like my husband, who, is a cis straight white man, but who, recognizes the patriarchy and wants to dismantle it. And so, that's just a key part of my own personal value system and calculus as I'm making the decision about what to take on, and very much so about who to hire, to your point of the fact that, we see ourselves as role models. Like I'm really committed to hiring crews that reflect the diversity of our country and people who haven't had the same opportunities to come up. I filled with glee every time I hire a female grip, for example. Like, it's just so exciting. And it's harder to find crew that is not, oftentimes hard to find crew that's not straight white dudes. But it's worth it. And I've gotten a chance to work with such incredible, talented people all over the country by going that extra step.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly that, like, seek other women. I mean, look at everyone on this panel. We're all women. There's a lot of us in the industry. And, I go after women and people of color specifically. And I tell my department heads, I'm like, you have to find women and people of color to hire. You have to.
Yeah, that's smart. There's really something to be said for hiring that department head that's got 85,000 years of experience, but willing to train. So they'll open up and they'll get more people in there, because it's hard to hire a key grip that has no experience.